This is Paul Poirier at the American Banjo Museum, and we're doing our best to preserve, present, and promote the banjo in all of its styles. But we can't do it without you. We need your support, so I hope you'll join me in contributing to your American Banjo Museum. And thank you.
Hi everybody, welcome to the American Banjo Museum and Virtual at Noon. My name is Johnny Baier. I'm the Executive Director of the museum and the guy with the dream job in the world if you love the banjo. And I love the banjo. One of the events that takes place every year is a thing called the Banjo Gathering, a collection of people who gather around a collection of banjos all made in the late 1800s, the time when the banjo was really coming of age as far as its development, its manufacturing, its design, and its repertoire. Some of the greatest banjos that have ever been made come out of that era of time. They became the templates of all the banjos that were yet to come. And this Banjo Gathering brings the most serious collectors of all those banjos together in one place. A year or so ago, it was in Norfolk, Virginia. I had the chance to be there in person and had a wonderful time. Last year, during COVID, they didn't have an in-person banjo gathering, but they invited me and the Banjo Museum to be part of the event by bringing our collection of banjos from the late 1800s to you or to them via video. We took a lot of time and a lot of effort to kind of document the banjos that are in our collection, and we thought, seeing as we went to all that work, it would be great to share that collection with you during Virtual at Noon. So right now, we're going to rewind the clock back just about a year to the Banjo Gathering, virtually, from 2020, and the American Banjo Museum's contribution to that event. It was a great experience to be able to share our marvelous collection of late 1800s banjos with the people who knew more about them than anybody. We hope you enjoy as well. Pleased to be asked to be part of this year's virtual Banjo Gathering. Having had such a great time out in Norfolk last year, it's nice to be back with you all, if only in a video sense. Knowing that you're really interested in the minstrel era and classic era banjos, I think it's a good idea, if you've never been to the museum before, for us to give you a little 50-cent tour and give you an idea where we came from and how we got to be here in Oklahoma City. It's really with sadness that we're doing this video on September 29th. Just a couple of days ago, our benefactor and founder, Mr. Jack Canine, passed away. Jack was an industrialist from Indiana, and he had a lifelong passion for the banjo. That banjo passion carried through to his business life, where he named his business the Banjo Corporation out of Crawfordsville, Indiana. The Banjo Corporation dealt in liquid petroleum transfer apparatus, say that 3 times fast, for the agricultural industry. They had a little valve that kind of looked like a banjo, so the banjo moniker on the Banjo Corporation was really very appropriate. Because of the company name, Jack ultimately started a little banjo collection back in the 1980s. He was a closet banjo player who enjoyed the music of the 1920s, and he played the jazz-age tenor banjo, so naturally his collection kind of focused on those jazz-age beauties with the gold plating and engraving and all that sort of stuff. He ended up, his little banjo collection, having about 50 instruments. At one point in time, he decided he wanted to downsize and donate that collection to a museum. He checked around to all the major candidates, the Smithsonian and all the big museums around the country, and quite honestly, none of them really wanted to accept his donation with the condition that they be put on display, which is something he really wanted to do. So in 1998, we started what was called the National 4-String Banjo Hall of Fame and Museum in Guthrie, Oklahoma. That little facility above the YMCA was leased for $1 a year, and it gave us our start. We had 2,000 square feet, which included exhibits, offices, storage, restrooms, and everything. So you can imagine it was quite a small facility. Back in 2007, a collection of jazz-age banjos came on the market. It was a guy in Germany named Dirk Frericks who had collected over 200 American-made jazz-age banjos, and he was ready to downsize his huge collection of a lot of things. So he had these 200 banjos. With Mr. Canine's help, we acquired that entire collection in one fell swoop, and at that point in time, we outgrew our facility in Guthrie. Now, I understand with 250 jazz-age banjos, why so many people think of the American Banjo Museum as a four-string banjo entity. That's a fair enough thing. In our early days, we truly were exclusive to the four-string banjo. But once we made that acquisition of the Dirk Frericks collection and outgrew our Guthrie facility, we knew we had to find a new museum. We looked all over the country. We went to cities that had a musical identity, places like Nashville and New Orleans. Then we wanted to get away from the musical identities of certain cities because we didn't want to be thought of as a blues museum or a jazz museum or a country museum and have that association with the museum. So to keep a diverse identity, we looked at a few other cities, places like Orlando, where we knew everyone might be able to get to the museum someday because almost everyone goes to Orlando to visit Disney. Ultimately, because we were in Oklahoma and became kind of an entity here and became accepted in the Oklahoma arts and cultural community, we decided to stay in Oklahoma City. We wanted to be right in the center of everything. We found the best location we could. There's a district in Oklahoma City called Bricktown. It is primarily nightclubs and restaurants, shopping, that sort of thing. But they build themselves as an arts and entertainment district, and us bringing in an arts and cultural entity as like a museum, we were a perfect match and welcomed with open arms when a building became available in Bricktown. At that point, again, it was Jack Canine to the rescue. He saw the building, he saw the location, he said that's where we need to be. He ultimately purchased the building. He set up an endowment to allow us to keep the doors open where we are right now, and he also paid for all the renovations that you see in this museum. So when you think about the American Banjo Museum, you must thank Jack Canine and think of him for what he has set up here to share the history and the heritage and the music of the banjo with the world, literally. Our visitors are from all over the world. Some people come from overseas and make this little spot in Oklahoma City their destination. So we are delighted to be able to present the banjo in such a modern and upscale setting and share its amazing story with so many people, and that's all thanks to Jack Canine. So I hope you'll indulge this little tribute to our benefactor and our founder, because we wouldn't be here if it were not for him. I think it would be appropriate to take you on a 50-cent tour of the American Banjo Museum so you get an idea what we're all about. Yeah, we started out as a four-string banjo museum, but that's really not the case. Back in 2012, with Mr. Canine's help and really his encouragement, we were looking at becoming the diverse American Banjo Museum, welcoming all styles of banjo, all types of banjos, and all types of banjo playing. This is something that was really new for us. It was a great learning experience for me because I was able to really cherry pick some great banjos from the minstrel era, from the classic era. Of course, we had a bunch from the jazz age already. And then we picked up the story with post-World War II, bluegrass, and of course mixing pre-World War II and post-World War II banjos that were associated with bluegrass music and the music that came out after World War II. And of course another banjo identity after World War II was the resurgence in the popularity of folk music. So we picked up all those different banjos, some of the iconic instruments from each of the banjo periods. And when you go through the American Banjo Museum on the first floor, it becomes a primer of banjo history. We start really with the earliest history, when the banjo was introduced to American soil by enslaved Africans. We pick up the story of minstrelsy. We carry on into the classic era. And then, of course, the jazz age of the roaring 20s and those wonderful banjos that came out of that era, which we have so many of. We pick up the story after World War II with the emergence of bluegrass and, of course, the folk music revival. So if you go through the first floor of our museum, you will see the instruments that go along with all of those iconic periods of banjo evolution. And then you will also see kind of a timeline of American history to put it in context for people who aren't banjo players. If you walk through the American Banjo Museum first floor and that's all you see, you should walk out with a good basic history of what the banjo is all about and why it's so important. We really want to take it further. And when we get into the museum, there's a lot more detail that a lot of people don't see. We have our archives, we have our learning lounge, we have many resources here for people who really want to dig in and get the nitty-gritty on banjo history as well. So if you're a casual visitor or if you're a banjo scholar, we try to cover the basis of creating resources for you to get what you want out of your visit to the museum. Knowing the level of interest of guys and gals who are at the Banjo Gathering, being really focused on minstrel era banjos and classic era banjos, I thought we'd spend a little more time, actually a lot more time, on that area of the museum's collection. Now, to be very frank, when you look at collections that you're seeing at a normal banjo gathering, the guys like Jim Bowman and Hank Schwartz, and when they bring all these wonderful and many, many banjos from those eras, we're really very pale by comparison in our numbers. We've really tried to amass a collection that is representative more than encyclopedic. What we've tried to do is assemble good representations of some of the iconic instruments from both of those periods of banjo evolution. So I thought we'll take one or two at a time and point out some of the stars of our collection. When we were assembling our collection of minstrel and classic era banjos, we really needed to go to the go-to guys in the world. And they're, of course, very, very active at the Banjo Gathering. Jim Bowman, Pete Zergo, Hank Schwartz, and Mr. John Huerta also shared some of his instruments with us as we put together a nice representation of minstrel and classic era banjos. This lyre-shaped double scroll peghead from before the Civil War, as we all know, it's pretty hard to document banjos from before that time. Maker unknown, but it was acquired from a very well-known collector, Mr. Jim Bowman. We really want to thank Jim as he guided us in putting this collection together to show the public the evolution of the banjo physically, and of course tie it with pop culture during the era that banjo really came of age in the United States. This particular instrument is one of 10 minstrel era banjos in our collection. Each of them has a different experiment in head tensioning. So that's why they found their way in their collection. Of course, there's a lot of other neat things about them, but the head tensioning differences from all the different makers was something that really attracted me and wanted me to get certain banjos into the collection. And this is one of our real stars. One of my favorite designs from the minstrel era came from 1866. It's called William Tilton's Improvement. The reason I like it so much is there is no hardware on the outside of the banjo body that would typically house the hooks and nuts for tensioning the head. All that is done from the inside, where square-headed bolts raise a little tension hoop forward or backward to increase or decrease the tension on the head from the inside. So all you see on the outside are these little pretty brass rosettes, and it's a very, very elegant design, which actually won a patent. Another one of my favorites from our collection is this Tree of Life banjo. It has this beautiful marquetry fingerboard that is just an outstanding piece of banjo art, coupled with this huge frailing scoop, beautifully handmade hardware. We don't know who made it. It's an unknown maker, again from the collection of Jim Bowman, but one of our really, really, how should I say, crowd pleasers. People will walk through this entire exhibit. They always stop and look at this for some reason. It's a real, real banjo work of art. As the 1870s emerged, banjos became big business, and everyone was trying to cash in on the banjo boom of that period. William Dobson's patent model 425 came up with something that I guess was new enough and innovative enough to get a patent. What he did was take typical common wood screws and place them around the tension hoop of the neck and use that to either raise or lower the tension of the banjo head. I guess by today's standards it seems a little bit primitive, but in 1873 he got a patent for this particular banjo design. Go figure. Doing Henry Dobson's use of wood screws one-upsmanship, this unknown maker back in the 1870s took long bolts, ran them all the way from the front to the back of the banjo body, allowing to adjust the head tension from both the front and the back. Maybe not the best design in the world, but it's really something that stands out as being unique and, again, illustrative of how people were trying to develop and better the banjo as it really became mainstream towards the 1880s. The centerpiece of ours or any minstrel banjo collection would be a banjo made by William Boucher. Yeah, there are a number of Bouchers floating around, but there aren't too many of them on public display. We're really proud that Jim Bowman was willing to share with us one of his Boucher banjos that allows us to share this early, basically prototype of all the banjos that were yet to come with the general public. Having a Boucher in the American Banjo Museum was a dream come true when we started expanding our collection, and we're glad to say that dream really did come true. William Boucher. It's worth noting that the National Four-String Banjo Hall of Fame Museum turned into the American Banjo Museum as part of what we called our five-string expansion. Prior to 2012, many of you are aware that our museum focused exclusively on Jazz Age four-string tenor and plectrum banjos. At that point in time, our benefactor and founder and driving force behind us making this move, Mr. Jack Canine, decided that if we're going to tell the story of the banjo's history long before and long after the Jazz Age, we're going to need to get the instruments to do it. The classic era five-string banjos, which we acquired for this collection to represent some of the best manufacturers of that era, were the most fun I had in putting this collection together. I really enjoyed seeing the banjo evolve into a really fully manufactured, fully promoted commercial product, as happened in the 1800s with companies like William Cole, Fairbanks, Fairbanks & Cole, S.S. Stewart, and some of the other companies that are all well represented in our collection of classic era banjos here at the American Banjo Museum. One of our earliest banjos from the classic era is from 1889. It's a Fairbanks & Cole Le Grand Imperial. Really, truly an elegant banjo with its saw-cut mother-of-pearl fingerboard inlays. The extension on the fingerboard, which is, I think, the first model that had this fingerboard that hung over the head, and what I call these beautiful Maltese cross ivory carved tuning pegs. Really, really an elegant example of early classic era banjo making. As we all love Fairbanks banjos, we're really lucky to have some beautiful examples of the earliest works right up into the fire, right into the Vega days. This number 6 electric is one of the top of the line banjos. This came from Jim Bowman's collection. Truly, truly an elegant, elegant instrument. Very, very fine in detail, and of course using the electric tone ring, in this case an inverted electric tone ring. Then from John Huerta's collection, this wonderful 12-inch banjarine with a fingerboard extension, beautiful ivory pegs and tailpiece, and an oak neck. Yeah, I said oak. It's really cool looking when you get up to it. Then over here, I don't think we've seen too many of these. From 1892, it is a Fairbanks electric piccolo banjo with the electric tone ring. There's a lot of piccolo banjos floating around, but so far, not too many full electric tone ring Fairbanks examples. So we're really, really thrilled to have this in our collection. When Fairbanks introduced David Day's revolutionary White Lady design, it really was a turning point in banjo history. The beautiful use of lighter woods was very aesthetically pretty to look at, but the tone of the White Lady banjo seems to be the one that still is looked upon as the standard of old-time banjo sound 100 or more years after it was introduced. Of the two White Lady models introduced, the number 2 and the number 7, it is obvious that the number 7 is the most beautiful banjo to come out of that era, at least in my opinion. This one from 1905 has got the engraving on the inlays by Achille Consalve. Everyone who's into these banjos knows that name, but to people who come to the museum, it's amazing to watch their instinctive reaction to the depth and detail in the engraving seen on this particular banjo. It's really, really a masterpiece. Frederick Bacon was basically one of the first celebrity endorsers. Of course, he was endorsing his own product. Banjos that carry the Bacon name went all the way from the early 1900s, well into the jazz age, right up to 1939 when the company continued under the Gretsch name, but was dissolved under the Bacon Banjo Corporation name after the hurricane in Groton, Connecticut. This number 3 professional Bacon banjo was from the early days. Fred Bacon was a celebrity, and he was not actually making these banjos, as many of you already know. This particular era of Bacon banjos was made by the Vega company, but Fred Bacon put his name on them and sold them, and they had that unique, of course, resonating chamber in the back with the F-holes. But what makes this particular banjo really, really special and kind of distinctive among collectors, it's called the Chubby Dragon. Up on the peghead we have this wonderful engraving, which in this case was done again by Achille Consalve. So finding a Chubby Dragon done by Consalve is really, really a great find and one of those banjo curiosities of the early Bacon Banjo Company history. Now, if you're into Fred Bacon, we're going to take a little break from the classic era section we're in right now and take you down into the American Banjo Museum archives to show you some real Fred Bacon treasures that you'll only see here. For you fans of Fred Bacon, we are down in the secret archives of the American Banjo Museum, where we have some real treasures. If you are not aware, Fred Bacon was a wonderful performer, wonderful musician, and as I said, a celebrity endorser for his own Bacon brand banjos. But before that happened, he was simply a marvelous concert performer, and we've got certain things that you really don't see anywhere else. We were very fortunate when C.C. Richelieu and his successor, Rick Tipple, donated these items to the American Banjo Museum. A flyer from a Fred Bacon and Cassie Bacon concert. We have original photos from the Forestdale, Vermont Bacon shop, interior and exterior. A wonderful 8x10 that's really been seen an awful lot, but an original 8x10 from the Groton, Connecticut factory with all the shop and crew that made the Bacon and Day or the B&D banjos for the Bacon Banjo Company. This photograph of Fred Bacon with the World Championship Banjo Trophy. If you look real hard, it's autographed by Fred Bacon. Back in 1895, when he was still a young concert artist, Fred Bacon started this scrapbook. It's signed on the front, Frederick Bacon, 1895, and contains little newspaper clippings as he was growing in stature as an artist. We have the whole scrapbook right here. And this is one of my favorite pieces of Bacon memorabilia. It is a watercolor done by Frederick J. Bacon. Signed on the back. Pretty cool if you're a Fred Bacon fan. Let's head back upstairs and see some more classic era 5-string banjos. No look at our collection of classic era banjos would be complete without bringing up the rivalry between Fairbanks and Cole and, of course, S.S. Stewart out of Philadelphia. These guys were all after the entire market. Stewart was the one that, when we look at the banjos that remain from S.S. Stewart, they tend to be the ones that are the most use of pearl. And once you get into the presentation models, you're going to find an awful lot of inlay work in the banjos. In this case, a very subtle presentation model, just a little more pearl on the peg head than normal. But what makes this one stand out is the dowel, which is hand carved, and all the marquetry inside of the banjo body. Really a piece of Stewart's best work in their early presentation models. We love Stewart, we love Coles, but I really love Fairbanks too. We got a real special Fairbanks I want to share with you right now. As banjo manufacturing really got perfected during the early 1900s, Fairbanks seemed to lead the way. Now this banjo we're looking at right here is one that I guess a lot of people have never seen before. This is a Fairbanks Tupafone, made by Vega of course, but Vega Fairbanks Tupafone Deluxe from 1910. It's got some real special features on it. The sunflower heel carving. The vine pattern on the peg head, normally only seen in 1909, but the peg head is bound. We have these wonderful fingerboard inlays, but if you'll notice, this banjo has got 5 full-length strings with an extra string in the peg head right in the center. Now, we're not sure because we know this banjo started out as a typical 5-string banjo with a shorter 5th string peg on the side of the neck. If you look carefully, you can see the banjo has been shaved down. The neck's been shaved down and shaped to make it into a full 5-string plectrum style banjo. Around 1911, Brent Hayes was very popular. He was also an endorser for Vega, so this may have been something to do with the Brent Hayes kick. It might have been an experiment. It might have been hand done by somebody afterwards, although the contour of the pegs that go in the back look like factory work. So we don't know how this all came about, but it's a really special banjo. Gold-plated and silver-plated engraved metal parts, abalone on the back of the shell. It's bird's eye maple inside of the shell. We've never seen anything like this. I don't say it's one of a kind, but for us, it's truly one of these Fairbanks treasures that I don't think many of us have seen anywhere. After the infamous breakup between Fairbanks and Cole, William Cole went on to create his own name in banjo manufacturing. While he never really got to that level of Fairbanks, when you look at the Cole banjos among collectors that stand out, it's always the Model 3000 that is the one we gravitate towards. It's the Man in the Moon, and everybody loves the Cole Man in the Moon inlay on this little particular banjarine. Of course, the nice fingerboard overlay makes it stand out a little bit more as well. If you're going to get a Cole, get a Man in the Moon. As far as I'm concerned, that's the only Cole you need. While the center of banjo building activity seemed to be up in the Northeast, Philadelphia, and of course Boston, Chicago took its place as a banjo manufacturing center as well. A couple of the companies that are represented in our collection are J.B. Shawl. This banjo from 1893, Shawl had a store in Chicago and produced high-grade banjos for professional use. The hallmark of the Shawl banjos is the use of really ornately engraved German silver in both the fingerboard and the peg head overlay. It's really a distinctive look. As far as banjos, how they sound, so-so. But in terms of a really distinctive looking banjo, they really are different than anything anybody else made. Another major Chicago musical instrument manufacturer was Lyon & Healey. They, of course, are famous for their concert harps. They marketed fretted instruments under the name of Washburn, and Washburn banjos really held their own in terms of the visual aesthetic that was really prominent during the late 1800s. This Washburn presentation from 1894 has a full spun over German silver rim, which is really ornately engraved, but what really makes this banjo stand out is the fingerboard inlay, beautiful mother of pearl inlays with a little bit of a silver vine going through the whole thing, capped off with another big mother of pearl fireworks display on the peg head. A really good example of Washburn's banjo art. We're back in the American Banjo Museum archives with something I couldn't let you guys get away without seeing. Now, this is not a minstrel era banjo, it's not a classic era banjo, it's a jazz era banjo, but it has a great, great connection to what the Banjo Gathering is all about because it was made by the Bacon Banjo Company for one of Fred Bacon's cronies. This is a monstrous 5-string banjo. It is a Knee Plus Ultra number 8 with a 12-inch head, a huge deep body, a neck that is about as thick as a baseball bat here at the lion's head carving, and of course beautiful rosewood neck. It's obviously a very, very custom-made banjo. It was made for a guy named Charles Frink, and if you look in the Bacon catalogs, you'll see him holding this particular banjo in the catalog. So it's really fun to see that total provenance of an instrument carried through all of its life. But I know you guys who are playing 5-string, classic 5-string banjo would like to see something that illustrates how Fred Bacon's influence over his 5-string cronies at the time really brought this jazz age style banjo into the classic era style of playing. So if anyone has a real 5-string Ottinger tailpiece, we'd like to get it for this banjo. But I knew you'd want to see it. We hope you've enjoyed seeing these banjos from our collection in the late 1800s. They're banjos you won't see anywhere else except the Banjo Gathering if you're fortunate enough to go as soon as they can do it again in person. But for the time being, it was a great thrill to bring our collection to them and to you. And we hope you've enjoyed seeing it as well. Now we invite you to join us every Saturday at noon for Virtual at Noon from the American Banjo Museum. Tune in next week. Our own Lucas Ross is going to be doing a show. It's always fun, always entertaining, and always a good time to see Lucas Ross because he is one of our favorite people. Lucas, you're on next week. For me, I get the week off. See you next week, folks. Virtual at Noon from the American Banjo Museum.